Good afternoon, good evening. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for Sphere's Town Hall meeting. We're delighted to see you here today. We can see people from all over the world, from the Sphere community, members, focal points, trainers, Anina, I've just seen, supporters, friends of Sphere. It's wonderful to see you all, so thank you for joining us. I'm going to start with a few words of housekeeping. The first is about closed captions. So most of the town hall will be in English, but if you would like closed captions in your language, please press the closed captions button, the CC button, at the bottom of the Zoom toolbar, and you can access translated captions in your language. And then secondly, a note about the format of today's meeting. So we're very lucky to have two guest speakers today who are going to share their reflections on how we can navigate perhaps the troubled times that are ahead of us as humanitarians at the moment. And so they're going to each speak for around 20 minutes. And then after that, we'll have 10 minutes after each presentation for any questions or any comments you might have. So please put your questions and your comments in the chat, and we can look at them together after each speaker has spoken. Then we'll be moving on to William, who's next to me, the director of Sphere, who is going to talk us through Sphere's draft strategy, 2026 to 28. And then hopefully, if we've stuck to our timings, we'll have 30 minutes at the end for questions, for comments, for discussion. The whole of the Sphere Secretariat team is here. Well, Tristan, Zunaira, Raquel, Helen. So if you have any questions, any comments, please put them in the chat as we go, and we can discuss them at the end. So once again, thank you so much for joining us. And I will pass over to Raquel in Mexico City, who is going to present our first speaker. Thank you, Raquel.
Hi, everyone. It's very nice to see you. And I have the honor to present Dr. Hugo Slim. He is a senior researcher fellow at Las Casas Institute for Social Justice at Blackfriars Hall University of Oxford and at the Institute of Ethics, Law and Armed Conflict at the Blavatnik School of Government. He is also a visiting professor at the Schwarzman College at Tsinghua University and at the International Academy of the Red Cross and Red Crescent at Sohu University. Today, we will talk about Humanitarianism 2.0. This book is clear, a practical call to rethink how we do aid in a warming world. Hugo argues that humanitarian action must protect both people and nature, make fair choices when needs are overwhelming and focus in core duties, anticipate, adapt, mitigate, and support locally led responses. It is a short, timely guide to making aid more ethical, effective, and climate ready. Thanks, Hugo, for being here today. And if you have questions for Hugo, please write them in the chat. You can do it in Spanish or English, and we will address them at the end.
Raquel, thank you for such a nice, kind introduction. And thank you, William, Felicity, and Tristan, too, for inviting me to join you all. It's really good to be with Sphere. I feel, just being with you for 2 or 3 minutes already, I feel you're really a community, and you have a strong community, not just a community of practice, but actually a community of friendship and fraternity and sorority and everything that is important in this world. So it's lovely to see you and to be with you, and particularly because I remember, I'm old enough to remember the origin of Sphere and when Sphere first started way back, and people had this idea of standards. And it was very revolutionary because, in a sense, what a lot of international lawyers and human rights people said you were doing is that you were actually putting quantifiable detail and indicators to human rights to food, health, water, protection, etc. So you were quantifying human rights in a way that hadn't really happened internationally before. So you've played a great role as the Sphere community in the recent history, the modern history of humanitarianism. And of course, you have to keep playing that role, updating, adapting standards, in a world which, as Felicity said, is, as usual, very difficult. And our changing world is sort of coming into focus now, and we can see that it's a world for humanitarians of much less money, much more war again, much less internationalism. We're seeing a shrinking of internationalism and a retreat to national humanitarianism, national priority, national interest, and probably regional blocks, which may well emerge as regional blocks of enemies in the years ahead if we can't stop that. And of course, all the time, while this sort of near-term problems of the world, like war and political disunity and decoupling of globalization, while that's happening before our eyes, a bit further away, we're seeing climate change really take a grip, and we can see a future potentially of what I call an Earth emergency. So, regardless of our political emergencies and our funding emergencies, I think we are increasingly operating in the context of an Earth emergency, an emergency for the whole Earth. So my contribution this morning is to think about that bigger, long-term sort of planetary Earth emergency, if you like, and wonder what that means for humanitarian aid and humanitarian standards. And I'm suggesting we need to redefine humanitarian action for this Earth emergency. We need to redefine our ethics, our purpose, our practices, our standards, and our organizations. And we have to, in a sense, answer two questions. How do we do life saving in a changing Earth? And how do we find life saving harmony between humanity and nature? And that's in my new little book, what I've tried to answer for us. And I'll just take you through the main points of the book in a sense of humanitarianism 2.0 as I see it. And of course, it's a difficult time to do it because everybody's focused on the tragedies in Gaza and Ukraine and Congo and instability in Syria and uncertainty in the progress of Syria and all these different things around you. But I'm going to argue first that we need to revise our fundamental ethics. We need to change our first principle of humanity and impartiality. And we know, of course, that our current principle of humanity was essentially invented and written out by a Swiss guy called Pictet in 1965 and agreed by the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement. It's then expanded and been agreed by NGOs, by the UN agencies, and by many governments. And that principle is to alleviate human suffering wherever it may be found, to protect life and health, and ensure respect for the human being. And that's a great achievement. It is a great achievement, although we fail every day to do it. It is a great achievement over the last 4,000 years that we have found a way to recognize humans, the human species, as a single moral community around the world, a single common humanity. But what I'm going to argue is that that is not enough. And finding a moral community between our own species is not enough, especially in an Earth emergency. Because as humans, we don't float free above the Earth. We are not some sort of super species that can just live flying in the air without the Earth. We are Earthlings. We are creatures of the Earth. And the very word human comes from the Latin humus, for earth. And it says that we are of the Earth. And this shows us, as we know every day in our life, that there is no human life without other life. And we always live our human lives as hybrid creatures, dependent on nature. So we are always water humans and rice humans, or wheat humans, or falafel humans in Syria, or air humans. And I believe we need to recognize this mutualism between humanity and nature in the humanitarian project now for an Earth emergency. We need an all-life ethic, and we need to recognize that survival is a joint project of humans and nature together. We survive and we exist because of mutual aid. Nature protects us, it feeds us, it cools us, it shelters us, and we can protect nature as well. So, in that mutual aid idea and recognizing this mutualism of life on the earth. And each one of you knows this truth as a humanitarian because every time you try to save a human life, you are essentially plugging it back into nature. You are plugging a human life back into fresh water, into food supply, into shelter materials. You're always plugging human life back into nature to save it. So I think we have to change our first principle and we have to go back, and we haven't done it since 1965, so let's do it now and rewrite the principle of humanity and say that we should be not just protecting human life, but protecting that mutualism of all life between humanity and nature. Or more simply, we should be protecting and saving human lives in harmony with nature. And in my book, I draft 3 different ways we could change our first principle. But I think we have to do it in an Earth emergency. So that's the first change, to agree ethically and in terms of our purpose and principles that we need an ecological humanitarianism, not just a human-only humanitarianism. And that we must therefore set a new standard in our purpose and ethics, whereby we value human life and nature in combination and in a way, whenever we can, equally. And if we make this big ethical shift, which I would like us to do, but of course everyone's distracted with war at the moment, but of course not everywhere is Gaza, not everywhere is Ukraine. There are large parts of the world where the bigger priority is the Earth emergency, climate-related vulnerability and disaster. And I think that will get bigger and bigger. So if we change our fundamental purpose and our principle and our ethical standard, then I think we need to do 4 practical things. And the first thing is we need to change our unit of analysis as humanitarians. At the moment, we work about people in need, and we go around the world counting people in need, and we call them PINs, P-I-Ns. But I think we need to change our unit of analysis away from people in need, and we should take a landscape approach to suffering and talk about places in need. And we should open our eyes to the suffering of nature as well as the suffering of humans, and do all life assessments as humanitarians and all life response, so that we are as concerned with environmental and ecological sustainability, with the suffering of trees, of water systems, of clean air, and all these things, that we're as concerned with that as we are with human life, because we know they are mutual lives and we cannot save one without the other. So that's the first thing to do, to take a landscape approach and change how we look at the suffering around us and to include nature and humans in that perspective. And the second thing we have to do in an Earth emergency, and we are doing it very well actually in many places, is to think more about the future, because we know that situations will get worse for nature and humans. And therefore we have to think into the future. We have to anticipate and we have to adapt. And that means changing the way we work to always be thinking as far ahead as we can about suffering that is about to happen, both nature and humans, and working forwards into the future, investing money and resources now to protect future life. And we are doing that with anticipatory action, anticipatory aid, and also in our everyday activity, humanitarian action mustn't just replace what people have. It must go further and help them adapt to a changing earth and a changing environment. So aid always has to be a good humanitarian action now needs to be an adaptive humanitarian action for people. Otherwise, you leave them in exactly the same predicament environmentally. And the third thing we need to do, therefore, if we're going to do that well, if we're going to be ecological humanitarians, we have to change our organizations and our practices. We have to make new integrated organizations where we throw ecologists, environmentalists, and humanitarians together in a single organization with a combined purpose to protect humans and nature at the same time. This means rewriting the mandates of our organizations. It means rewriting United Nations mandates so they push together and work on nature and humans together and don't just work on children, women, education, health, whatever. And I think that's the big opportunity the UN is about to miss in its own UN 80 reset. I think we should write new mandates for new organizations which are always working on humans and nature together, on the environment and the ecology, as well as our own species. And in our teams, we have to mix ecological and humanitarian expertise. We need people who are skilled at both, who are skilled at understanding landscapes and ecology and thinking 10, 20 years ahead, and people who are skilled at understanding human need, human capacity, human suffering, etc. And that's an exciting challenge, and many agencies have always done a bit of that. Agencies like CARE, WFP, many multi-mandate agencies have always mixed their teams like that, but I think we have to really do it as a real effort now at the moment. And then fourthly, the last thing we have to do is represent nature better. In a sense, one of our great successes as a humanitarian community is to gradually represent and include new humans, new people who we have blind spots for before. So we start the humanitarian movement in the 19th century with prisoners of war. We just think of young male bodies who are wounded in war. We don't see civilians, we don't see women, we don't see children. Gradually, as we evolve, in the First World War, we see prisoners as well as wounded. We see non-combatants and begin to call them civilians and include them in humanitarian action. Then we see the particular suffering of children, women, men, etc. And that's what we have to do now with nature. We have to include nature and bring nature to the table so that we can understand the needs of nature and the agency of nature, the way nature can help save us and save itself in an earth emergency. And of course, political representation or inclusion around a table is always difficult, but I think we need to do this in our own organizations. So I think in your boards, on your discussions, you need to find a way of bringing nature to the table. So someone is sitting there saying, well, thinking about the trees and the rivers and the lakes and the air, this is what's important here, and bringing nature to the table somehow. And there are new ways to do that. Imagining, bringing in ecological experts. You can delegate, as people do in New Zealand, or is happening now in England even, you can recognize a river and delegate a group of people who live and know that river well to be the face of the river in meetings, in diplomacy, in all sorts of things. So we need to represent nature. We can also do that by recognizing the rights of nature as we have recognized human rights. And lawyers are working on this, and Sphere can work on this, because you can have standards for representing nature and standards for protecting nature as well. So I think that would be exciting. That would be a really big next step for Sphere in the Earth emergency. And for me, that is humanitarianism 2.0. And I hope I can sell it to you, even at this difficult time in the world when we are thinking more about war and enmity than we are about climate and the Earth. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Preston. Hello, everyone. I'm Zunaira Shams, and I look after communications here at Sphere. It's lovely to see some of the familiar faces today and also some new ones. When we gather like this, it's always good to remind ourselves why we're here. It's about the people, the communities at the center of everything we do. Standards, policies, and programs only have meaning when they connect with people's realities. So with that focus on people in mind, I'm happy to introduce Gerry McCarthy from PIFM, the People First Impact Method. Gerry has worked in the humanitarian development and peace building for over 40 years, leading at national, regional, and international levels. He co-developed PIFM, a people-centered methodology, now used in more than 50 countries, which helps us truly listen to communities and bring their voices into how we shape standards and practice. I'll hand over now to Gerry to talk about how PIFM complements the standards and how we're using community-led data to feed into the Sphere programming. Gerry, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Zunaira. That's very gracious of you. And thank you, Sphere, for this opportunity to be part of this town hall. And thank you, Hugo. I feel that your presentation makes sense. I think it's timely, and I think it's doable. When Paul O'Hagan and I started out with PFIM some years ago, we looked at the humanitarian sector and we felt that while we were working for people, we were not actually engaging with people. What if, instead of us bringing programs, what if we listened first? What if we heard what people are doing? And when we began this approach, all we had was the concept that people's voices matter. And we had no idea what would come out of it, what would transpire as a result of this approach. And some years later, and many countries later, a lot has transpired. And I think there is a convergence with what PFIM has discovered and the challenges that you present, Hugo, the challenges and opportunities. And I do agree that Sphere is in a very good position, because Sphere is respected, but also Sphere doesn't take itself too seriously. There is a convergence of the why we should do it and the how to do it. And I'd like to talk a bit now about the how to do it. I've written out my presentation for the most part. I'm Irish, therefore I could go on forever telling stories, even without a pint of Guinness. So I'm presenting what I've written and with a few comments here and there. The PFIM concept is not new. It is rooted in philosophy and psychology and the universal nature of what it means to be a person in a community. My voice matters, your voice matters, their voice matters. Every person and community has the right to be involved in the decisions and issues that impact our lives. Whether an earthquake in Syria or conflict in Ukraine or Gaza or Sudan, and even when people's right to engage is suppressed, that right remains. It is always right to first listen to people. A PFIM exercise is convened by an agency in a location where they are working or planning to work. The convening agency invites 16 participants from different agencies who are local to the area, who speak the language and know the culture. PFIM is always applied by people who are local to the area. Expatriates are welcome to be part of the exercise, but they don't engage communities. The exercise is experiential. Participants first experience and understand why their voice is important, how to listen to each other even before they listen to the community, to work as a team and to accurately record what people say, not our interpretation of what people say. We promise participants two things at the start of a PFIM exercise: that they will know how to facilitate a goal-free engagement with communities, where the communities lead the discussion, not the agencies. And secondly, we promise that they'll know how to facilitate two-way engagement where communities discuss their important issues and solutions and key issues that may be important to an agency. I was part of a Pan-African discussion with Red Cross a few years ago, and Red Cross were presenting their two-way engagement approach. And I had to politely remind them that it was a wonderful one-way engagement. The rule of thumb is whoever controls the question controls the answer. PFIM goes beyond why we engage, and focuses on how to engage. The aspiration or hope of agencies to engage with communities is high. It's very motivating for me and for Paul and for others when we facilitate PFIM exercises all over the world to meet so many young, committed, wonderful people within agencies. It is really an inspiration. However, often it's the how to do it is the challenge, not that we want to do it. We begin by listening and building trust with people. No agency agenda, no assumptions, no questionnaires, and no agency logos. An interagency approach removes agency program bias, and I think that links well with one of the points you made, Hugo. When we listen without judgment, we create the space for people to share freely. Listening without judgment is an essential part of trust building with communities and also with our colleagues, even with our families. PFIM is a life skill. It's a life skill that we use at work. 16 interagency participants form teams of 2, facilitator and reporter. Each team meet a community group, maybe women or men or youth, farmers, business people, local leaders, children, people with disabilities, the elderly, whoever. When we listen, people share what is important, most important to them, positive and negative. And when we probe, not lead, people share why it is important and who or what is responsible. Because participants in a PFIM exercise are men and women local to the area, they can meet small community groups, even in hostile contexts, even in war situations. It's always possible to listen. People are more than needs. They have abilities, knowledge, and innovation. We had no idea what was going to emerge from PFIM exercises. It's extraordinary, the ability of people. When we truly listen, and we are not afraid to build trust, when we don't think it's outside our comfort zone, people go beyond sharing facts and data and problems. They share how they truly feel about the important issues in their lives, including their solutions, what they are doing, and what they are planning to do. I often describe it as communities are way ahead of us. They just play a game with us, pretending that we're important. They turn challenges and needs into local solutions. If we only ask people to share their needs, that is all we'll get. So I think that a rethink of the paradigm, as you suggest, Hugo, might be to move from a needs-based approach to an added value approach. If we listen, we hear their solutions, what they are doing and planning to do. We've learned never to assume a community is doing nothing or can do nothing. That's, to be honest, that's arrogant. We've also learned that in general, agencies do a little, but talk a lot, that communities do a lot, but have little opportunity to say anything. People often say agencies ask questions and gather data, but this is the first time they have actually listened to us to hear what we have to say. Isn't that extraordinary? That a humanitarian sector, and this was discussed right up to the World Humanitarian Summit 10 years ago. We were saying the same thing then. Understanding context and knowing the starting point. The starting point is where people are, not where we as agencies want them to be. In 2021, Malteser International were given a global award at the World Health Summit in Berlin for their epidemic preparedness and response to address Ebola and later COVID-19 in DR Congo using PFIM. Communities in Ituri province believed Ebola is a curse from God. That is their right. Such crazy notions are pervasive all over the world right now. Crazy ideas that people believe. That is their starting point. By listening and building trust, Malteser International, the Ministry of Health, and partner staff listened to people, built trust, and respected what they said, their beliefs and their fears. Using two-way engagement, real two-way engagement, they openly discussed and explained that Ebola and COVID-19 are diseases, while respecting their underlying belief that they're also a curse from God. They achieved a shared understanding with communities and an agreement on how to move forward together, and they addressed Ebola, and they used the same approach to address COVID-19. The response was community-led and effective. In fact, it was possible for other agencies such as UNICEF to be brought into the relationship to effectively deliver their program. Experience is transformative both for communities and frontline staff. One of the groups that we are intrigued with when we do PFIM exercises is the frontline staff who actually do the exercises, who actually make it work. And how not just, they often say, it's not just the community voice that we need to hear, we also need to listen to the voices of frontline staff. That's a new one. Frontline staff who truly listen to their own people for the first time are transformed by the experience. They do not want to return to business as usual, top-down, agency-led questionnaires developed by experts. When they experience an us and us engagement with their own people, they don't want to go back to a them and us approach. They know the value of first listening to people and moving forward together. Of course, the challenge is the space there within agencies to accommodate this new learning? I think that relates back to another point you made, Hugo, about changing the paradigm. Simple works, complicated does not work. We did not know this was going to be an outcome of what PFIM exercises would reveal. It seems too simple, too basic. As agencies, we often develop complex questionnaires and tools to support data gathering and analysis. Very complicated tools. Some of the tools I've seen are beyond belief. Using two-way engagement, we can simplify a tool, share the tool with communities, for example, a health questionnaire or M&E tool. Ask, does it make sense? Is it relevant? Can it work for you? And how can it be improved? That's not rocket science. But you'll be surprised how difficult it seems for agencies to do it. In this way, we can turn a top-down agency tool into a tool that makes sense and that the community and frontline staff can own and use. Doable. Quantity and quality. As agencies, we often think that quantity and quality are separate, two separate entities. In fact, they are two sides of the same coin. The well or school or health center or training is the quantity, and how people truly relate to the school or well or training is the quality. When we listen and build trust, people move from speaking about the well as quantity and share how they truly feel about it, why it is important to them and why they will protect it, and how they plan to dig more wells for themselves. That's taken from an actual PFIM exercise. Localization. The new fad. In 2017, a PFIM case study in East Africa, we asked the question, if localization is the answer, what was the question? PFIM experience shows that all agencies, local and international, this is not a judgment, it's just what is the evidence from PFIM exercises, that all agencies, local and international, struggle to engage communities across the board. The truth is, all agencies are only a means to an end. True localization must be about people, communities. That's where localization must work. Who are the most important actors from the community perspective? When we look at reports from all over Africa and Asia, Americas, Europe, we may think the most important actors are agencies, NGOs, UN, Red Cross. From the community perspective, the most important positive and negative actors is community and government, way ahead of agencies. In fact, there's some agencies could pack up and go home, and I don't think they'd actually be missed, even in conflict or disaster contexts. Lastly, I want to talk about why Sphere and PFIM are compatible, why I think they're compatible. Sphere and PFIM have the same motivation, the same urgency to be there when disaster strikes. The why we do it is our link. And this is important. I'm saying that because there's a lot of agencies or actors out there who, I would say, pretend their values. The Sphere Humanitarian Standards identifies 4 vital response areas in a time of crisis: wash, food security and nutrition, shelter and settlement, and health. While these 4 sectors are stated, they're often stated in PFIM exercises by communities. So they're issues for Sphere, but they're issues for communities. Communities also often emphasize other issues. For example, access to accurate information is a huge issue. Emergency travel support, especially in conflict. Skills training, even in the disaster. Business and livelihood support, even in the disaster. Security, and to be listened to be heard, to be respected. PFIM can inform some assumptions, identify key community issues, what people and others are doing, and how best agencies can add value. An added value approach rather than a needs approach. For example, WASH was a priority sector in Rakhine State in Myanmar. In the PFIM exercise, work, family income, cyclone management, and fresh water were priorities, and especially family income. This is what people wanted. This is what their focus was on. They weren't interested in WASH. During two-way engagement, teams shared how open defecation, sewage, and wastewater are causing diarrhea, typhoid, and other diseases that require expensive medical treatment. It was an aha moment for communities. They quickly made the link between disease and health costs and how WASH could improve health and directly impact family income. Then they chose WASH as a priority. They could make the link. Hugo, we had a look at environmental shocks from across and how people are relating to environmental shocks across 14 African countries where PFIM exercises were carried out. And I think this speaks directly to your presentation. People said flooding, drought, and erratic rainfall destroy crops, livestock, homes, and schools, drive up prices, and heighten intercommunal tensions over access to land and water. They emphasize practical, the communities themselves emphasize practical local solutions, such as soil and water conservation, tree planting, riverbank restoration, intercommunal rangeland, watershed management, small-scale irrigation, flood control, resilient schools that include WASH, drought-resistant crops with diversified livelihoods, early warning and preparedness, and savings and insurance to plan ahead and protect assets. None of this was shared as a result of a questionnaire. This is what people said when given the chance. The diversity of solutions shared across all exercise underlines the capacity, insight, and ability of people. All communities emphasize that response must be community-owned and led. Services must be reachable during shocks and track the environmental results people care about. In this example, 565 national staff and volunteers from 253 agencies worked was part of interagency teams with 187 community groups. 3,530 community members were directly involved. It can be done. It is most important that the example I shared is the voice of communities. There were no agency questionnaires, and given the chance, people shared their challenges and their solutions. If we only have focused on a needs-based approach, we would never have heard that. In January 2025, Sphere, HSP, and PFIM agreed to incorporate a Sphere question into a number of PFIM exercises that will be carried out in 2025. For example, to inform the Sphere revision process. Sphere mission and vision documents were used to inform a generic Sphere question. The question is, emergencies are part of life. How does your community address emergencies? And how do you rebuild afterwards? What additional support may you require? How should it be provided? That follows the simple format that we use in two-way engagement discussions with communities. They share their issues. We take the issue back. We say, this is your issue. How to manage depleted water source. What are you as a community doing to address it? What additional support do you require? The first part is, what are you doing yourselves? The sphere question has already been successfully used in several PFIM exercises in Nigeria, Niger, Syria, Malawi, and Bangladesh. And our wonderful team of people, Hamza and Axel and co in Damascus, were part of the exercise in Gaziantep, and then exercises in Syria. A great wild bunch of people. And additional exercises will be carried out in Mali, Mozambique, and Ivory Coast by Paul in coming weeks. A Sphere PFIM draft report is completed for each exercise, along with a summary report of the whole exercise. And all of this will be made available in the not too distant future, I promise you, Tristan. The Sphere PFIM collaboration can ensure that the genesis of all information, data, and knowledge is rooted in the lives of communities. That all assumptions are tested and informed by the people who matter, and that facts and data are only important if they are true. Let me finish as I started. A people-first approach is about my voice, your voice, their voice, our right to participate and decide, while the space for people to share is threatened more and more. We can ensure that the voice of people and communities remains at the center of what we do. We can build from the bottom up. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't go too much over time. Thank you very much.